Hey everybody, it's your girl Tunisha Brown, founder and editor-in-chief of Impact Magazine, and thank you for being in the moment with Tunisha. Today I'm here, talking to some amazing women about how do we protect Black women. So I'm here today with Deputy District Attorney Amber Stargell,
Hi, everyone.
and we are going to sit here and talk about her. You just came, how long you been in Utah? You've been here
Four
from
and a half going on 5 years.
4.5 going on 5 years, and from East Cleveland,
No,
east
east
side
of
of
Cleveland. Yeah,
Cleveland.
so I'm from
And tell
Cleveland.
me the distinction between that.
Okay, so East Cleveland is its own city. It's a different city. East side of Cleveland is an area of Cleveland. So it's
Gotcha.
inner city Cleveland proper.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I'm originally from. My mom moved us there from this really small town in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. I say nowhere, but we moved to Cleveland. I was in second grade, and then we grew up there. Um, then she moved us to the suburbs when we were, I don't know, when I was in high school. And from there, I graduated, went to college, and that was that.
Did you go to college here in Utah?
No, I started off at Bowling Green State University where I got my undergrad degree in telecommunications and business.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did my first year of law school at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas, and I transferred from there to the University of Utah. And there's a whole story behind that. But
Oh, okay.
yeah.
And what made you decide law?
Okay, so growing up, I've always, when you're a kid, I don't know if you took these in New Jersey, but they're called, I think, altitude tests
Mm-hmm.
where you take them and they tell you what you should be when you grow up. And every
Right.
time I would take that test, it would always come back attorney. So I
Mm-hmm.
remember one year I specifically tried to answer differently. So I'm like, I want to do something different. I want to be an attorney. And it came back social worker. I thought I was gonna say astronaut or something, but anyways, it always came back to something leading in law.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasonings always came down to you're very compassionate,
Mm.
supportive, fair, justice were always the words that came up. And it took me a little while after graduating with my graduate degree in telecommunications for me to decide, okay, law school is what I want to do. Um, and I think what really pushed me into doing that was Brian Stevenson's book,
Mm-hmm.
um, Just Mercy.
Okay.
And I went to go study abroad in France for 6 months. And before I left, my aunt gifted that book to me.
Mm.
And so I read that book while I was in France. And when I came back, I told my family, I said, okay, I think the next thing I want to do is law school
Mm.
after reading that book.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And what was the distinction in that book that confirmed to you that this is exactly what you want to do?
So many parallels in a lot of different ways. But it really made me realize how much someone like me is needed specifically in the criminal justice system.
Hmm.
And today's topic is protecting, Black women and Black populations. And in the criminal justice system, you really think about it, not just in Utah, anywhere in the United States,
Mhm.
there's just not enough African American female prosecutors, period,
Right.
to be on that other side of the table and say, you know what, I'm looking at this case and something doesn't feel right, something doesn't seem right. And I'm looking at it from a lens differently than other people who
Right.
are sitting at that table.
Right.
Even like not even just in Brian Stevenson's book, but even the movie with the Central Park Five.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about how, you watch that, you're like, well, who was in that prosecution room that could sit there and say, no, like this isn't what really happens in these situations. This is,
Right.
who's over there really looking out for the rights of those people on the other side. And so sometimes it takes someone with a different perspective and a
Mm-hmm.
different background to hone in on key details that a lot of people will overlook, such as things like economic disparities, um, lifestyles in general,
Right.
how people interact with each other. Those are all things that are usually indicative to one's experience. You can't teach a lot of that.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of things I didn't learn in law school. I just know
Mm-hmm.
from my experience growing up in Cleveland.
Right.
So yeah.
And you know what? I just had a talk with a company, and we talked about shared experiences
Mhm.
and how a lot of us as Black people, we have shared experiences. Like we can tell you about playing spades. We can, because that's
An
a
electric
shared,
slide.
that's those things
Yeah.
that we as a culture do. And it was like open your mind to the fact that people of a different culture, like we didn't grow up the same as you,
Mhm.
even though we all are human beings. And so when you bring that experience into the law practice, I think that's amazing because some things can come across and you're like, wait a minute, that's not normal. Something's out of place. And do you find that you find yourself in that position a lot to see that things are not in place? And you're like, let me dig a little further to see. And this thing is twofold. If that happens and you're on a case and other people are saying, no, I think it's this way, but you're being led this way from your shared experience, how do you work that out?
Ooh, those are two good questions. So the first question is, part of it is just my job in general.
Mm,
I think whether I'm prosecutor or defense attorney, because I used to do defense too before I went to the prosecution's office. Either in either position I'm playing in, it's important that I really dig deep into something that I'm like, okay, something's a little off here, whether it's something going on in the fact pattern or something where it's like, okay, I don't know if the officer did, the investigation right. Let me call and see a little. That's part of my job. And I think
mm,
anyone, regardless of their background or regardless of where they come from, that's what they should be doing,
right.
because there's too much at stake when, especially when you're talking about felonies
Mhm,
and you're talking about someone going to prison possibly for little mistakes. I'm not saying that, mistakes happen and sometimes people overlook them because our volume is so high, right?
right.
But part of my job is to make sure that I go through and I'm being as thorough as I possibly can. And I'm still young in my career, so I'm still learning how to do that in a way where it's a little more impactful and meaningful,
Mhm,
but in a way that I know it's the first thing that's important to me. Like I sit down, the first thing I have to do is read a police report,
right.
and skim through it and figure out all the evidence that I have so far. And then the second part of your question is how do I go about that when there's something intuitive and there's other people, pushing against that. And it's interesting. I came across that maybe once or twice so far. Um, and part of it is um, you have to go into the situation realizing one, which part of it is my job
Mhm,
and which part of it is just me, pulling into my own emotions. And then which part is right and which part is fair.
mhm,
And so when I get into those situations, I put everything in categories. And if it's emotional, I tell everyone just block out the emotions in it, even myself. And so like I'll block out the emotions of it and then focus on what part is my job and then what part of it is fair.
mhm,
Um, and if there is a workaround or if there's something where I know that there's a lot of difficulties, then that's where you get creative and you start looking at the law and then making your arguments based around what the law is. And so
mhm,
that's the I guess the good point or what the selling point of doing your homework
mhm,
is when you do your homework and you get into those positions, then you know where all your players are and what you can do to actually make a decision or outcome the best way that you can possibly make it.
and being in Utah, I always tell people it's a unique experience. How is the experience for you as a Black, attorney in your position?
It's unique. What's interesting is that I've only been an attorney in Utah since I've been practicing.
Hmm.
But I've had the blessed experience of being a law student at HBCU in Houston,
Mm,
Texas. And then being a law student at the University of Utah as well, and having those shared and comparative experiences helped me to realize that it is different. Even as a law student, when I got here, I was like, this is different.
Mhm.
Um, some ways that I went about it is that you have to get, once again, you have to get creative.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you probably experienced this too, where you walk into situations, you're like, what, how is it that, I think one thing we talked about was the Black History Month thing.
Mhm.
And then,
Mhm.
so coming from places like Cleveland, New Jersey, Houston, sometimes those things are given
Mhm.
and people just do it. But then here it's kind of like you have to start asking questions like, why isn't this here? Why isn't this that? So I got creative as a law student. I started creating my own groups, reaching out to people on LinkedIn directly, just letting people know like, hey, I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm a Black woman in Utah and I'm studying law. I don't know what to do and I don't know where to go in a lot of situations. Can you help me?
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door with a lot of things.
Hmm. Now, what advice would you give to someone who is seeking this type of career in spaces with majority of the people who do not look like them?
Be open. Be open. Because it's gonna be different. And this experience pushes you out of your comfort zone a lot. And in being here, and I'm trying to loop this back into the theme too of protecting Black women. So when you come here, it's important, one, to set your boundaries while you're being open. I think
Mhm.
that's key. Um, but definitely check and see where there are places where you can change your perspective on things and change how you look at things, because sometimes your opportunities will come in the most least expected places, especially in a place in Utah. And I would hate for anyone to come to a state like Utah and say, well, I don't see anything that looks like what I'm used to, or see anyone who looks like the people back home, because
Mhm.
your experiences and your blessings could come from some place or someone completely unexpected.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of my biggest blessings have come from people who I would have never guessed. But I said yes in a situation where at first I wanted to say no.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Amber, for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you, Tanisha, for having me. I appreciate that.